So we're going to look more into stanzas 12 to 22 now. Make sure that you looked at the beginning lesson of stanzas 1 to 11 before you do this one, because otherwise it'll be confusing. But yeah, just going to go a bit deeper into the story at this point. And there's a bit of a shift that I was noticing at the end of stanza 11, where they're having a really great time. They finally admit their love. They're meeting at night secretly. Suddenly, there's a bit of a kind of uncertain tone going on. We feel like something's going to go wrong. And it says, were they unhappy then? It cannot be. So were they even so early on in their relationship unhappy? They can't have been. Too many tears have been shed over lovers. Too many sighs have been paid to them. Too much pity after they're dead. Too many sad stories have been written about them. The content of these stories should be written in bright gold, except in pages such as those where Theseus's wife headed towards him over the pathless waves of the sea. So this type of stanza is important to note. These are kind of what I call a narrative interjection. So sometimes the narrative voice of the poet, of Keats, comes through the story and starts to comment on what's going on. So you get some stanzas where the action is continuing, and then other stanzas where he's sort of talking and giving his opinion, or kind of more generally exploring the themes and ideas of the story. So this is one where he kind of takes a moment out of the actual action of the story to kind of comment and say his thoughts on the ideas of love and sadness, love and pity, love and tears. So he thinks that the subject of sad love, doleful stories that are kind of full of sadness, is beautiful, and it's worthy of literature, it's worthy of immortalizing in poetry. And he mentions this thing about Theseus and his wife at the end. So Theseus is a Greek hero. He's in a lot of different myths. The Minotaur is the most famous one. You might have heard of that one. And he basically was thrown to death because Athenian society turned against him. So there's a lot of things that happen to Theseus, but the thing that's most similar to Keats's story, the reason why he would use an allegorical reference here, good technique to write down, the reason he does that is because the whole of Athens, the society of Athens, turned against him, and he was thrown to death off a cliff into the sea. Poor Theseus. But the general gift of love is the small amount of sweetness that kills bitterness. So again, going back to the idea of honey that we were looking at in the original earlier stanzas, sweetness and bitterness. Life is bitter, life is horrible. Love is an antidote, love is beautiful, love is sweet and nourishing. All of those ideas come across all the time in Keats's poems. Though Dido was silent in her grove, Isabella's love was a great distress. And even though young Lorenzo was not embalmed in Indian cloves, this truth about love is not diminished. Even bees, the little supporters of spring bowers, spring gardens, know that the best juice comes from poisoned flowers. So the most important line, I think, this one is this one at the end of the stanza. Stanza 13. There is richest juice in poisoned flowers. Kind of summarizes a lot of Keats's attitude to life. The idea that the most sweet nectar, the most beautiful things, come from things that are tainted or broken or poisoned or doomed or deathly. The juxtaposition of something really positive with something negative makes it more intense and more extreme. So he's not interested in a standard love story. He's interested in doomed love and tragic love, in things that are poisoned, tainted, that they're going to fail, or that they have trouble and strife around them, because it makes the actual beauty of the love itself more intense, more positive. So that's a really core central idea to this poem and to a lot of Keats, his poetry and himself as a person in general. So you have to kind of get your head around it, that things are more happy if they're also juxtaposed with sad. So sweet and bitter, rich juice, poison flowers. Again, a narrative interjection, his voice coming through, talking about the themes in more detail. We're talking about Dido, who is the Queen of Carthage. She's an intelligent woman. She escapes from her brother Pygmalion after learning that he was involved in her husband's death. And then her husband, after he's dead, comes in a dream and tells her what's gone on. So the reference to Dido, another allegorical reference, is relevant because of the story parallel. So when he uses these references to ancient mythology or sometimes to Christianity, he's mirroring those mythological tales on top of his own story to help us understand more deeply what's going on in his own tale. So this fair lady, Isabella, she lives with her two brothers, and they're all enriched from ancestral merchandise. So their family has become rich from being merchants, from being businessmen. And he's very anti-capitalist here. Keats himself struggled a lot with financial issues, and he always resented the idea that you need money to sort of exist in the world, because he wanted to just be a poet and focus on his writing, and he's always getting distracted by needing money or borrowing money off someone or being in debt or starving because he couldn't afford to eat, or trying to train to be a doctor and then having to drop out to look after his brother who was sick because they were living in poverty. So all these different tensions, tragic tensions in Keats' own life that makes him very prejudiced against the idea of business and capitalism. And Florence at this time is an emblem of capitalism. It's the banking capital of Europe. It's one of the richest cities in the world. And so that makes sense why Keats would target it as a place to critique the social structure of. Is very different from having a go at his own London or his own England. But in the same way, you can see parallels there, that he resents that structure exists in London as well and is oppressing him right now as he writes the poem. So he doesn't like these brothers. He doesn't like their values and their attitudes in society. Many tired hands are working hard in torched mines and noisy factories for the sake of making these brothers rich. They don't do these horrible menial jobs that pay very little and cause a lot of suffering. They just benefit off it. They get rich off other people's suffering. Many once proud quivered loins did melt in blood from stinging whip. It's a bit of a weird image, this one. But it means that they were strong, healthy men to start with, and from constant kind of whip and kind of violence done upon them, or physical, psychological oppression, they have been beaten down and controlled for the sake of the brothers being rich. They have hollow eyes, the people that work for the brothers, and they stand all day in a river to try and take the rich ore driftings of the flood. So they're sifting through stones and rock at the bottom of the river to try and find gold. It's a metaphor that people hang around them in the dazzling river of the presence of the brothers to try and catch a little bit of gold as they go by, like to try and get a little bit of money out of them for this or that. So there's a huge hatred of money and wealth, and the idea that this type of system where people are getting paid very little and they're doing life-destroying work, and the brothers aren't doing anything difficult like this, they benefit from it. So you've got this idea of a huge criticism of the capitalist system, the way that working classes are exploited by upper middle classes or aristocratic classes. So we have some more anger at the brothers now. So the Ceylon diver, Sri Lankan divers, people living a long way away from Florence, they dive for pearls beneath the sea and they hold their breath just for the brothers. They're just making money for the brothers. They're exposed to the idea of the hungry shark, and they risk their lives because they want to get paid by these brothers. And the seal is lying on the ice, barking piteously in pain from being hunted, dying from being full of darts, because the brothers want the seals for something. They probably use seal blubber or something. So they destroy nature and they destroy humanity with their greed and their selfishness and their obsession with money. And he has to kind of hammer this point home. So we've focused away from the beauty of the love of Isabella and Lorenzo to look at the society itself and what is the society doing. The brothers are a representation of that society, and they're just exploitative. They're evil, they're selfish, they're money focused, and they cause a lot of suffering for anyone involved in them because they want more money, they want a better life. So they turn an easy wheel that is connected to sharp racks. They're also half ignorant, meaning they're only half aware of the system and what they're doing. Even though they're really bad and they're creating a lot of suffering, they're kind of half ignoring what they're doing, but also only half aware of the extent to which their behavior causes suffering in the wider world. So they set humans basically on racks, which are torture devices. They push them and stretch them to their limits, being pinched and peeled by the tasks that they perform. So we've got two stanzas here, just going through loads of detail on the brothers and what's wrong with them. And then we have another narrative interjection. Why were they proud? Why were they like this? Because their marble fountains gushed with more pride than the tears of a wretched person. Their fair orange-groved gardens, their orange trees in the garden, and lands were more pleasant to walk on than the steps to the leper hospitals, because red-lined account books were richer than ancient Greek songs. So we're getting more of their feeling there. Why did they do this? Why were they so proud and so exploitative? Because they like having marble fountains. They wanted nice scenery around them. They didn't want to think about the hospitals down the road that care for sick, poor people. They cared more about their account books than the beauty of ancient Greek songs. So that is a particular, if you're going to choose one of the questions to use out of the stanza, this one is probably the best one, because red-lined accounts were richer than songs of Grecian years. So what it means is they care more about the numbers in their book that they're making money than the beauty of art, the beauty of poetry, the beauty of history. So ancient Greek art and literature is so rich and complex, according to Keats, and money is so simple and obvious and basic. For these brothers, they like the money more than they like art or they like poetry. So obviously Keats is going to dislike them because he's the opposite to that. Why were they proud? Ask again. Again we ask aloud. Why in the name of glory were they proud? What a very insistent tone, building tension, repeating a lot in this stanza. It's quite a good one to look at, that one. So these Florentine brothers, they rest in hungry pride and gainful cowardice. So weakness, being cowards, but also in a way that they get something out of it. There's a slightly racist image here, and it's important to note that it's kind of more normal in this time. So obviously nowadays we would consider this to be a racial slur and inappropriate and so on. For Keats, it's kind of just a lot more normal. Not that it's good, obviously it's terrible, which is luckily why we don't have this type of thing now. But yeah, you'll notice it if you read older things, that sometimes they have this type of thing in them. So they're compared to Hebrews, which is Jewish people, and they are also compared to the hawks of Shipmas Forest. So they're kind of like predatory. The idea of Hebrews is that they're kind of money obsessed, which is obviously a completely incorrect view of Jewish people, but at the time a sadly common one. There's a mention of ducats as well, which is a sort of nod to the Merchant of Venice, a Shakespearean play about a Jewish moneylender. So partly I think what he's doing with this one is he's kind of creating a range of different scenarios and situations that are businesses throughout the world that these brothers are involved in. So we also have this mention of Spanish, Tuscan, and Malay. They speak a lot of different languages. They're great wits. They're actually very intelligent, and they use their intelligence wrongly. So their wealth is built on dishonesty, exploitation. It's international. From Florence, they conduct business everywhere. They're called ledgermen, bankers, and he uses that in a very nasty way. Nasty term. I apologize if any of you have ambitions to be bankers one day. But yeah, he has this kind of hatred for them, as you can see. So how could these same bankers spy on beautiful Isabella in her soft nest of a bedroom? How could they find out that Lorenzo's eye was distracted from his work because it's focusing on her? Hot Egypt's pest, the plague of darkness and jealousy, came into their vision. How could these money bags, so again, obsessed with money, that's all they're worth, see east and west? I don't know how they managed it, but that's what they did. Every fair person should keep an eye out, like their hair being hunted. So they prey on weakness, they prey on gentleness, and they hunt down anyone who could be exploited by them, including their own sister. So we've set up Isabella and Lorenzo. We've set up the brothers. Obviously, the brothers are villainous and evil. Obviously, Isabella and Lorenzo are the protagonists that we root for, even though they're tragic and they're kind of sickly and weak. They're pure and they have a true, honest love for each other. And then he switches to Boccaccio. So Boccaccio is the writer of the original story of Isabella. And he says, "O eloquent and famed Boccaccio, of thee we should now ask forgiving boon." So he speaks directly to the writer of the original story, and he says, "I'm really sorry that I actually used this story. Hopefully you forgive me and think it's okay. You have all these beautiful elements in these stories, like your spicy myrtle bushes as they blow in the wind, your roses that are in love with the moon, your lilies that grow paler. None of these things can hear the tune of your own lute because you're passed away, you're no longer alive." So the reason that he chose to write this story into a poem is to kind of keep the story alive and to pass on the messages of it to his own society. So he says to Boccaccio, "I hope you don't mind that I took this story, and it's out of love. Please grant a pardon." And then the tale shall move on soberly. So please forgive me for copying your story. And the story will carry on sensibly as it's supposed to do, it's meant to do. And then he says that there's no intention behind my words of another crime. I'm not trying to criticize what you did, your old stories, by putting them into modern rhyme, but this is what I've done, whether the poem succeeds or fails. It's intended to honor thee. So out of these stanzas, if you're going to write any quotes down, "O eloquent and famed Boccaccio," this is a technique called apostrophe. So he's directly speaking to Boccaccio. And then he says, it's done to honor thee. I want to honor you and greet your dead spirit, to put you as a verse in English tongue. So also he's translating, he's going from the Italian original to the English. And echo you, which again is a quite ancient Greek reference. So he's creating an echo of Boccaccio sung in the north wind, a symbol of England, of a more northern climate. So he really respects Boccaccio. He feels bad about taking his story, but he loves this story and he loves Boccaccio and he wants to do them justice. So mainly, that's not really helping you with the overall story of Isabella. That's just kind of justifying why he did it and making it seem like he's a humble poet, which he is. So he goes back to the brothers. These brethren, having found by many signs what love Lorenzo for their sister had, and how she loved him too, each unconfines his bitter thoughts to the other. I like this line. So they find out through a lot of different signs, because they've got spies everywhere, what's going on. And they allow each other to kind of admit their thoughts, their bitter thoughts. So it was their plan to coax her, to kind of force her eventually, by degrees, bit by bit, to marrying a high noble and his olive trees. The idea of marrying olive trees might sound weird. It's because it's intentionally strange. The idea is that they wanted her to marry so they get possession of the trees, or the business that the trees bring. So they weren't interested in her happiness or her future. They were interested in how they could use and manipulate her to their own ends. They had many jealous meetings, conferences, and many times they thought alone about it as well, and they fixed upon a surest way, the nearest way, the best way to make the youngster pay for his crime, so to make young Lorenzo pay. And at last these men of cruel clay cut mercy with a sharp knife to the bone. So these men of cruel clay, the idea that that's a kind of biblical reference, the idea that we're all made of clay and earth, and they're made of cruel earth. The earth they're made of is worse than average. This is an important plot point at the end of this set of stanzas. They resolved in some forest dim to kill Lorenzo and there bury him. So their plan is set. They decide to take him to a dim forest, a dark forest, kill him and bury him there. So that's up to stanza 22. Hopefully you're still with me. It's all making sense. And yeah, just jot down anything that's useful. You can maybe go over it and read it aloud to yourself and make sure that it all makes sense. But hopefully you're starting to understand the details and the specific lines of the story a lot more now. So yeah, I'll join you for 23 to 34 in a minute. Thank you for staying with me so far.